All right, before we talk about the LDS Church or the people who leave it, I wanted to give you a simple tool that I use to evaluate any narrative or belief system. It's called the NCI Test, and that stands for Narrative, Coherence, Integrity. This test helps you really quickly see whether a belief system or narrative is built on the truth or on control, and it's really useful in everyday life. So first, let me explain the test itself. Then I'll explain what the score means, and then we'll apply it to the LDS Church and what it teaches about people who leave it. The NCI test looks at three things. A, narrative control. Does the system try to control the story you're allowed to tell about yourself? Do they assign your motives? Do they preload explanation for why people leave? Do they demonize outside information? B is coherence. Does the story actually make sense? Or does it fall apart the moment you examine it? And the C is integrity. Does the belief system rely on truth, or does it rely on fear, guilt, shame, pressure, or identity? Add these three up, narrative, coherence, and integrity, and you get the final score. Now, here's what the final score actually means. The NCI score goes from 0 to 30. 0 through 10 is a healthy system. Open questions, honest discussion, no fear or shame for leaving. 10 through 20 is mixed. It's human, it's imperfect, and it's a blend of healthy and unhealthy elements. 20 through 24 is high control. This is where fear, guilt, and shame start creeping into the narrative. Leaving becomes suspicious. Loyalty becomes identity. 24 through 30 is psychological control. This doesn't mean bunkers or Kool-Aid. It simply means that the narrative structure functions like emotional manipulation. Assigning motives, punishing dissent, rewriting identity, and using fear to maintain loyalty. Now that you understand the test and the score, let's apply it to something very specific. What the LDS Church teaches about people who leave. What does the LDS Church teach? Here's a list, and you probably already know it. The people who leave are offended. They wanted to sin. They lost the Spirit. They were deceived by the doctrines of devils. Their testimony was never real, and they'll regret it in the next life. And then you get even stronger, more intense version from people like Brad Wilcox teaching the youth. If you leave this church, you lose everything that truly matters. And again, I'm going to quote him, "You can leave other churches and not miss much, but if you leave this one, you lose everything." Let's score this narrative. The narrative control, number one, score is 9.5 out of 10. The LDS system basically has the explanation for leaving scripted in advance. It assigns your motives, labels outside information as anti, and equates doubt with sin. It ties your identity to the church from childhood and tells youth they'll lose everything if they walk away. That's extremely high narrative control. Next, let's look at coherence. Let's test the LDS explanation and see if it actually makes sense. Well, contradiction number one, we stand on truth unless you study too much. If the church stood on truth, deeper study would strengthen belief. But the moment you dig into the real history, a lot of people's testimonies fall apart. And instead of addressing the evidence, the church blames those who look into the evidence. You've sinned. You've lost the Spirit. You were offended. That's not coherence. That's self-protection. Contradiction number two, the Holy Ghost will tell you the truth, except it regularly contradicts reality. Members feel spiritual confirmations for things that later turn out to be false. So either the Spirit is unreliable, or emotional experiences are being rebranded as divine proof. Either way, the narrative doesn't hold. Contradiction number three, agency is central. Unless you use it to leave. You're told you're free to choose unless you choose differently. Then suddenly you're deceived, you're broken, you lose everything. That's not agency. That's conditional acceptance, which gives it an overall coherence score of 9 out of 10. Healthy narrative stays consistent. Controlling narratives change based on the audience. So if you're inside the church, a true believing member, they were deceived. They wanted to sin. If you're outside the church looking in, we love everyone and we respect all paths. If you're an impressionable youth at a fireside, you leave this church and you lose everything. That's not consistency, that's messaging. And the last and most important is integrity. Integrity asks, is the narrative driven by truth or pressure? The LDS explanation for why people leave. Number one is fear. You'll lose your eternal family. You'll lose your purpose. You'll lose blessings. You'll lose salvation. You'll lose everything. Next is guilt. You didn't pray enough. You weren't humble enough. You didn't endure. Number 3 is shame. You're weak. You're deceived. You've betrayed your covenants. And last, and probably most important, is identity pressure. You are a member. This is who you are. This is emotional leverage, not truth. And it gets an integrity score of 10 out of 10. As bad as it can get. The final NCI score is 28.5 out of 30. Now, here's where it gets interesting. 28.5 out of 30 places the LDS narrative firmly in psychological control category. But I wanted to make sure that this wasn't just my conclusion or my bias or my interpretation. So I ran this exact same NCI analysis through 3 different AI systems, completely independently. And here's what they came back with. Grok put it at 28 out of 30. Gemini put it at 26 out of 30. Perplexity put it at 25 out of 30. Every single one with different training data, different models, different creators, all scored the LDS narrative above 24, which is the threshold for psychological control. That's not my opinion. That's a pattern that even machines can recognize. Now, in closing, to be fair and balanced, I'm not pretending that there aren't people out there that leave any religion for messy reasons. People who are hurt or mad or in chaos. But that group is very small, and they are the exception, not the rule. Most people who walk away from the LDS Church don't leave because they were offended or sinful. They leave because they studied, because they prayed, because they wanted honesty, clarity, and reality, because they followed the truth wherever it led. And when you run the LDS explanation for why people leave through the NCI test, the narrative simply doesn't hold up. And it's not a truth-based narrative, it's a loyalty-based narrative. And the NCI test just makes it impossible to ignore. As always, folks, keep asking good questions, and I'll see you next time.